Hi readers, it's Miss Sarah here again. Now, today I got up to something kind of silly. I've been stuck in my apartment for so long, I decided to clean out my closet and look what I found. I had no idea that I had these shoved in the back of my closet, but here they are. I thought it would be a fun game to talk about what's the same and what's different about each of these shoes. Now, if I look at them, one thing that's the same is they're obviously both shoes. I can wear them on my feet. Another thing that's the same is, uh, mm, mm, yep, they both stink. A third thing that's the same is that the colors are alike. They both have bits of like silver gray in them. But if I keep looking harder, they're not exactly the same. There are some things that are different too. For example, this shoe is very fancy. I could wear it to a party or a wedding. This shoe is not really fancy. It looks like one that I would wear just out in every day. Another way they're different is this shoe has beads on it, right, all over here. This shoe doesn't have beads. And a final way they're different is this shoe, oh yeah, this one has a back to it, whereas this one does not have a back by the heel of the shoe. Well, friends, if you had fun playing that game with Miss Sarah, we're going to do the same thing with the characters in our story. Today, I'm going to teach you one thing good readers can do is compare and contrast. What that means when we compare and contrast is we think, what is the same and what's different about our characters? So when we compare, we think, how are our two characters alike or the same? Clue words could be ones like also, same, similar, or both. When we contrast, we think, how are my two characters different? Some clue words could be although, however, unlike, or difference. We're going to get to this later, but this is a handy dandy chart called a Venn diagram, and we can use this to organize our thoughts. Things that are different go on this outside part of each circle, and things that are the same we write about right here in the middle where the two circles overlap each other. But like I said, we'll get to that a little bit later. First, we're going to dive back into Frog and Toad Are Friends by Arnold Lobel. And I want us to do a little bit of comparing and contrasting. As I read, I want you to think, how are these two characters the same and how are they different or not alike? And you can use not just what I read about in today's story, but also what we learned about each of the characters in the chapter Spring. So today I'm going to finish reading the chapter A Lost Button to learn how these characters are the same and different. So let's get started. If we remember where we left off last, a sparrow flew down and offered a button to Toad, but it was not the right button. That one had 2 holes. Toad's button had 4 holes. And Frog also found another button that wasn't right because it was too small. Toad's button was big. All right. A raccoon came out from behind a tree. I heard that you were looking for a button, he said. Here is one that I just found. That is not my button, wailed Toad. That button is square. My button is round. Toad put the square button in his pocket. Frog and Toad went back to the river. They looked for the button in the mud. Here is your lost button, said Frog. That is not my button, shouted Toad. That button is thin. My button was thick. Toad sounds really frustrated. No one can help him find it. Toad put the thin button in his pocket. He was very angry. He jumped up and down and screamed, "The whole world is covered with buttons! And not one of them is mine!" Toad ran home and slammed the door. There on the floor, he saw his white, four-holed, big, round, thick button. "Oh," said Toad, "it was here the whole time. What a lot of trouble I have made for Frog." That's him being dramatic, and that's Toad finding his button on the floor. Toad took all of the buttons out of his pocket. He took his sewing box down from the shelf. Toad sewed the buttons all over his jacket. I wonder what he's going to do with this jacket, readers. The next day, Toad gave his jacket to Frog. Frog thought that it was beautiful. He put it on and jumped for joy. None of the buttons fell off. Toad had sewed them on very well. There's Frog with a brand new jacket, looking pretty happy. And that's the story of a lost button. Wow, friends. We did a lot of hard work right now reading through the story. Now our job is to think back. We can think about a lost button. We can think about the story Spring that we read earlier in the week. And I want us to think, how are these two characters the same? And how are these two characters different? So here we have, again, part of Miss Sarah's floor, and also a Venn diagram. What's different goes on this side, what's the same goes in the middle. Now, when we compare and contrast characters, first we need to think back to what we've learned about them so far. So what are some things that character does, says, like, or dislike? We've already learned how to think about our characters when we did reading last week. Okay, so let's think back to our stories. Well, one way that I know Frog and Toad are the same, the first thing is they're both friends with each other. They both enjoy each other's company, and they do kind things. Another way that Frog and Toad are the same is they both are thoughtful. And I know they are thoughtful because Frog in Spring, he didn't give up on Toad. He kept finding ways to get him outside to enjoy that sunshiny spring day. And in A Lost Button, Frog also helped Toad out, hunt for his button, even when Toad was yelling at him and saying some like nasty things. And Toad is also thoughtful because when he realized what a bad friend he had been and all the trouble he caused Frog, he decided to sew the buttons he found on a jacket and give it to Frog. So those are both some examples of how each character is thoughtful. Now, how they're different. Well, we know that Frog is really hardworking. Frog never really seems to give up, right? We saw that in the first story, Spring, when Toad said, "Go away, I'm sleepy." Frog didn't go away. He kept finding new ways to convince him to go outside until he finally tricked Toad by changing the calendar. But Toad, on the other hand, he's not really hardworking. He just wants to keep giving up when he's looking for his button, and he doesn't want to go outside. So that tells me that Toad is kind of lazy. So those are two ways that they're different. Let's think of one way they're different. Let's think of another way that they are not the same. Well, if I think about Frog, he's kind of a more serious character. He's always trying to be practical and reason with Toad when he's convincing him to go outside or when he's looking for his button. He doesn't really give in. But Toad is very silly and dramatic, right? He is dramatic because when he can't find his button, he's like, that's not it, that's not it. He stomps. He's also silly because when Frog brings him outside the first time in the story Spring, Toad goes, I can't see, the sun is too bright. So those are some examples of how Toad is silly. And that, my friends, is how you will compare and contrast the characters in your own stories today. So good luck comparing and contrasting. Remember, when we compare and contrast, we think about what's the same and what's different. Happy reading. I'll see you again soon.